Hello everyone and welcome back to Wildcard Workshop. Today, we're going to be talking about version control. Now this is something that I've gotten a lot of requests over the last few weeks to do. It wasn't originally part of the plan, but you know what? Let's go ahead and do it. So specifically I'm going to be covering Git, but there are tons of other version control options available to you. It's just a matter of preference, but Git is the one that I'm most familiar with and most comfortable with. Now, I'm not going to be covering in depth the command line version of Git, which is, its core format, but we're going to be looking at Git Kraken. And what that is it's basically a UI wrapper around the Git command line system. And it makes things a little bit easier to manage and digest if you're not used to dealing with command line systems like that. Now, I do recommend and encourage everyone to learn how to use Git in its command line format. So I will be including in the video a cheat sheet that I like to use, and it does have reference links for learning more and how to use it properly and all of that. We're also going to look at setting up a remote repository so that you can take your working directory and basically back it up on a remote server. That way, if you're working in Teams, or if something happens to your computer, which none of us know what the future holds. Things happen, horrible hard drive failures and things like that. It's always a good idea to have a remote backup. So I'll show you how to do that. So what is version control? Well, the most basic form of version control is basically taking all of the files that make up your software or your mod and packaging them up in an archive and then putting a version tag on the archive and storing it away somewhere else for later. I'm sure you can probably tell this is not exactly efficient, either in time or space. You're going to spend a lot of time going through all of those archives, trying to figure out which ones they're for, and it's just not pleasant to do. So what systems like Git or SVN do is they only save changes that you've made. So if you make a commit and it's changed 4 files, it's only going to save the changes of those 4 files. Make another commit, make some changes there. It's only going to save those changes. And what happens is it ends up building this map, a timeline, from which it can reconstruct your working directory up to that snapshot point. So basically it goes through the history when you check out a specific commit. It goes through the history up to that point and says, okay, this was the state of the files at this point. We made some changes up here, let's apply those. Made some changes up at this next one, let's apply those. And it goes through like a fall through system, kind of a little bit like a reverse filter. And that's how, it manages this all in an efficient manner, and it takes up so much less space on disk. It really does. And it's a whole lot easier to, upload those changes because you're not uploading the entire mod or the entire piece of software. You're only uploading and downloading the changes that are different from what you already have. So we're not going to be dealing much with the dev kit itself today. We're going to be looking mostly at Git Kraken and the mod directory. And I'm going to show you how to get all of this set up. And we're going to be looking at using GitLab for our remote repository. So let's go ahead and get to it. So here we are. And if you remember, we've been working on this DinoShrine mod for a while now. But something that I have failed to do is put it under version control. Shame on me. Seriously, shame on me. It's a very bad idea to not be working under some kind of version control, whether it is file backups or otherwise. So we're going to fix that today. Now, what I'm going to show you is how to use Git with the Arc Dev Kit. I'm not going to be showing you much of how to use it in the command line because that would take probably a long time and several videos. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to use Git Kraken, which is a GUI that wraps around the Git raw system. And what this will do is it'll give you a nice interface to work with that will give you a good view of your entire repository in one go. And it's a lot easier to work with if you're not familiar with Git already. I do, however, recommend that you do learn how to use, Git in its command line form because there's some features that aren't available in Git Kraken that you might need in the future. But for the most part, you probably won't. Now, For that, I have a cheat sheet for learning Git as its, raw command line form. You can find it at rogerdudler.github.io/git-guide. And I'll put this link down in the description as well. What this is this breaks down the commands into what they do, how to use Git in its, as a simple primer. It's a pretty good cheat sheet to have available, and, some links for installations of Git in its different formats. But we're going to talk about Gitkraken for most of this episode. And you can find that at gitkraken.com. Now, this program is free, unless you're using it for commercial purposes. Works on Windows, Mac, and Linux. So go ahead and just download that and install it. And then for our remote repository, we're going to use GitLab, which is also free. You can create a free account on here. You'll want to do that. And the benefit of using GitLab over, say, GitHub is that GitLab offers private repositories for free. So once you've got all of these things set up, we've got our existing mod folder here. So what we're going to do is we're going to create our private repository to start. So I filled this out, gave it a project name, DinoShrine, project URL. It's going to use your username, and it's going to make the project slug, which is basically the last part of the URL based on the project name, but you can change it if you like. So the project URL is going to be gitlab.com/zenro/DinoShrine. And just give it a description. Visibility level is pretty self-explanatory. You can make it private, internal, or public. Internal is for like if you're working on a team, or, well, internal is going to be, that you have to be logged into GitLab for it. And then initialize repository with a README. You can do this if you're working with a new mod that you haven't started making files on yet. I'm going to leave that blank, and then I'm just going to create the project. Now, this project is empty. One thing to note is my account is already set up with an SSH key. Your Git remote repository can be HTTPS based or SSH. I recommend SSH, but you are going to have to generate a key for that. There are tutorials for doing that. It's not very complicated, but it would take a little while to do it on this video, so we're not going to worry about that since it's already pretty easily documented, and there's nothing really specific about it for the Arc Dev Kit. So that's just something to keep in mind. Now, with our clean repo, we get some command line instructions here. Now, I said we're going to be using the Gitkraken GUI, but it's actually a lot easier to get our existing folder set up with the remote repository and Gitkraken from command line. And that sounds a little strange, but that's just kind of the way it works out. So before doing this, make sure you've installed MinGW, whichever Git setup for your operating system. Again, from this cheat sheet at rogerdudler.github.io/git-guide. For me, it's already installed. Once you have it installed, go to your mod folder, right-click in the empty space, and then do git bash here. And what this will do is it'll open up the git command line in the context of this directory. Now, from here, all we need to do is actually just kind of follow this. Now, in my particular case, I've already done this git global setup, but this is something that you want to do first. This kind of hooks up your local Git system with GitLab so that you have a username that it provides and an email. I've already done that. So looking through these, the one that we're going to be using is existing folder. Now, if you don't already have your mod folder set up and you're about to start a new mod, do create new repository, and this would set everything up and start it locally with no existing files. But in our case, we're going to be using existing folder. So where we are right now, this cd existing folder, we already did that sort of by doing the git bash here from this directory. So now that we're here, what we want to do is git init. And then we get initialized empty git repository at mods.dinoshrine, yada yada. And you'll find a .git folder in here. Now you only see this if your Windows Explorer settings are set to show hidden items. Otherwise you won't see that .git folder. But now that we've got that, we need to connect it to the remote repository. And all you have to do is copy and paste this line right here and hit enter. And now it'll add in the location for the remote repository to the local. Now we need to actually create the initial commit that's going to be pushed to the remote repository. And we can do that with git add and then a period. Now what that period signifies is here. Basically it's the current location directory, okay?
So by doing that, we're signifying add everything in this directory to the repository. Now you won't get any feedback on that, but we'll see it when we add this git commit hem initial commit. Now what this is doing is it's creating the commit, a snapshot of the working directory into the local repository, and a comment. And now we get some information about the commit. 11 files changed. Now those are the files that make up the mod. Now you'll notice it doesn't include the .git folder. That's automatically ignored by the system. And there's one last thing to do. Git push -u origin master. So what this does is it pushes the current state of the master branch, right here, to the origin. Now the origin is what we have specified as our remote repository. We did that when we did git remote add origin, and then that URL-ish thing, okay? Origin could have actually been another name. We could have given it a different name. Origin is just sort of a standard. When we hit that, we're going, in my case, because I'm using SSH, I'm going to get a prompt for my passphrase, and then it's going to push it. So now if we go back to GitLab and we refresh, there's all the files right there. So now comes the fun part, because now we're kind of done with working with the command line. That was just to set things up. You should have Git Kraken installed, and what you want to do, so you might not have all of this on screen because you don't have any repositories. What you can do is you can come up here to File, open Repo, open a repository, and then navigate to your mod folder. Then hit Select Folder. And there we have it. There's all of our stuff. It's all hooked up now. And you'll notice there is our remote already set. The next thing I'm going to show you, and this is a preference, okay? You don't necessarily have to do this, but I do like Git Flow. So once you're in your local repository, go to Preferences. On the left here, go down to Git Flow. Now, I generally just leave these at default. Then I go Initialize Git Flow. Now, you'll notice we've got a master branch, a develop branch, and our remote and all of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the develop branch real quick. I'm going to hit push and submit. I'm going to request for my passphrase again. And then what that did is it pushed our develop branch also to the remote. So now here we should have two branches, master and develop. So the reason we did that is because generally you don't want to be making changes to your mod in the master branch, in the branch that's going to be your live version. This makes it easier to keep track of testing and rolling changes back and making sure that you don't break things for your players. So let's say right now, our master branch is what's live. So that's good. Okay, we know it works, all that fancy stuff. Now, if we were going to make changes to the mod, what we'd do is we'd hop over here to the develop branch. Now, we're not in the Arc Dev Kit right now, but let's say you added a new blueprint. We'll just call it testbp.txt. That's fine. One thing to note is that generally, make sure you've got the dev kit shut down before you start messing with stuff in your version control, just to make sure that there's no mismatch of files and missing saves and things like that. You know, your working directory is in the state that you are actually intending it to be before you start pushing changes. So now you'll notice we've got this work in progress one here. It shows one unstaged file. So what we'll do is we're going to stage all changes. And in summary, we're going to do... So generally what I tend to do is for the summary section, I give it a version number. And then in the description, I give it, the notes about what was changed. This is a matter of preference. You could also tag your version numbers. I know that's probably the more common thing. This prompts me to actually look at the description and read everything that's in the commit to make sure that it's the actual one that I want. But we're going to commit the changes. So now our develop branch is one commit ahead of master. But you'll notice there's still a develop here at this same level. That's on the remote. So we've got a bit of tracking going on with our remote repository. So what we do in that case is after we've made a commit, we can push it. And now our remote is also caught up with the local develop branch. Now, let's say we wanted to merge our changes into the master branch because, they're ready for live. They've been tested, all of that fancy stuff. Over here on the left under Git Flow, we're going to do release. We're going to base it on latest develop. We're going to call it version 1.0.1. Okay, and this is going to create a new branch. Okay, so at this point, now that you've created this release branch, this is where you're going to do all of your release candidate testing. Okay, this is where you're going to make sure that everything is good. These are your last final checks before they go to the master branch and they go live. Now, if we assume those tests were good and everything's ready to go, we go back up here to the Get Flow menu, finish release. So now you can see we've got our master down here. Okay, this is the remote. That's what this is, the origin. But we've got our master up here, and it's been tagged as well with version 1.0.1. Now this is local. So locally, our master branch has merged in the changes from our develop branch. Okay, that release branch that was made before, that was deleted after the merge. So what we'll do is we'll push our changes up to the remote. And once it's done, you'll see that. We've got our initial commit down here. Our develop branch is over here, and our master branch is right here. So that's kind of the basics of working in develop and then merging into master when you've finished with your testing and making sure that everything's good to go. Now there's actually more to working with GitFlow. Now there is also feature branches. Now let's say you want to do something like you want to work on a particular feature. Let's say in our Dynashrine, we wanted to work on the UI. We obviously already have our UI implemented, but we're going to just pretend that it's not for the sake of this. Now what it did was it branched off of the develop again. Okay, so we're going to swap over. Oh, we've already got it checked out. So now let's create a folder, new file. You'll notice up here, we've got this work in progress again. This is going to be after our 1.01 version, so we will call it 1.0.1.1. And the way this versioning works is we've got major version. This is going to be like ones where, both client and server absolutely, it's important changes, really huge changes. And then we've got minor, and then, like subversion. Versioning is arbitrary. So in reality, you can kind of do it however you want, but make sure that everyone is on the same page. Everyone that you're working with, okay? That they understand what these numbers mean in your system and that everyone agrees and understands it. That's the most important thing. So we will stage the changes. And what that means when we say we're staging changes is we're adding them to the repository. And, if there's been any changes to the file, we're accepting those. We're putting all of the changes that we stage into the repo. If we don't want a particular thing to be included in the commit, we just unstage the change. Let's commit that one. Now let's say our user interface is done. Finish feature user interface initial. We will have it delete the branch, finish feature, and it's right here. It's this blue line, as you can tell by our version number right here. And what it is, it merged it into the develop branch. So now we are testing our, we're doing our, feature complete tests, so on and so forth. They're good. So now we want to merge it into master and be ready for release. So we'll create a new release branch, start release. So we're currently on that release 1.0.2. It's in line with our develop branch. So it's going to look like it's in the same place until, let's say we had a bug. All I did was write test in the file itself. You won't be able to do this with actual UI assets, but in, text-based languages, you can actually click on them and see the changes. But, let's say we found a bug, we fixed it, staged those changes. We'll name it a slightly different version. I'll just say we fixed a bug, and we'll commit, okay? So now our release branch is a little bit ahead, but that was the only issue, so we'll finish it. And then, oh, look at that. That wasn't quite right. So that's something to be careful about, is using these undo and redo buttons, because I actually managed to break something. Something I'm not familiar with. What happened here is our master, both the remote and the local, are on this version. And for some reason, it won't jump to this one. let's just go ahead and go back to master. We're going to pretend that, some of that didn't happen there. Let's say we just try it again real quick. Get a new release branch. Something went wrong. We'll accept that. We've created that. Now let's say we're done with it. Same deal. Finish release. Now master's up here. Develops down here. Yeah, so what happened was when I did that undo at the beginning there, I did an undo earlier, and what it did was it deleted one of the commits from the merge. So it didn't actually have the final commit from that pull. And it kind of broke that a little bit. Check out develop. Push that. So develop and master are now on 1.3, where they should be. So what I've done is I've added another feature branch just to make sure that we go through the process of this happening the right way and me not getting a little bit confused there for a moment. Finish the feature. Branch gets deleted, gets merged into develop. Yeah, see that? See how that's detached right there? That's because I broke it earlier. Don't worry about that. Just ignore that. That kind of tells you, hey, something went a little wrong here. Maybe you should have been paying more attention. So now, let's create a release. Start release. Once again, we'll say there was a slight change to that, a bug fixed. Commit the change. And then, we did our testing. Everything's right. We finish release. And then you'll see there, now it happened correctly. Okay. That change got merged into master and into develop. Now all we have to do is push those changes to remote, and we'll see them in the proper position. Okay, now we've got that bit sorted out. So now you can kind of see how this works with working with our branches in like a visual setup. The longer you've been making more commits and doing more of these, these feature branches and stuff, you'll start to see the color patterns kind of align there. Like this light blue, that's our develop branch. This dark blue, those are, median branches, feature branches, release branches, such and such. And then this purple one, this is our master branch. Now the colors might be different for you. They can change a little bit depending on the order of branches being created. But if we go into the remote repository, you'll notice there's still only two branches, master and develop. Now you can push your, feature and such branches to your remote repository. If multiple people are working on it, might be worth doing. Not necessarily required though. But these are the basics of working with Git. Now, basically, here's the deal. Is if, you want to work on your develop branch, you check it out, your files will represent that. If you want to work on master, check it out, files will represent that. Now, if, for instance, during your testing, you want to roll back to one of these earlier commits, maybe for some regression testing, you can do that, but you can't do it in Git Kraken. The best way to do that is to come in here. Well, it's to find your specific commit in Git Kraken first. Okay, let's say we want to roll develop back to this point where we merged the user interface into develop. Come up here to commit. We'll copy from there. Come back to your command line. Do git checkout, like if we were checking out a branch, and then paste the ID. Now you only see the first few characters up here, but this is the actual full ID of the commit. And then when you do that, you'll be checking it out. Now if we go back to our file list, you'll notice that blast.txt file is not there. This particular txt file does not have the change that I'd made to it before we merged those changes over. It actually sets it back to that. Now, if you want to go back out there, just make sure to come back into Git Kraken, select your develop and master to go back out to the other ones. Don't make changes on a detached head, though. Detached head is when you check out one of these commits earlier along in your branches. If you make changes on those, you're going to be basically branching out. You're going to be creating a separate, it's not a real branch. It's not going to work correctly. You're going to run into problems if you do that, so just don't. Make sure that if you are making changes to any files that you are doing it either at the head of a branch, or if you need to actually like come back to one of these earlier commits, which you can do. So let's say we just merged the user interface in. But let's say we really need to roll back to this section. Okay, all of these changes, they're bad, they're terrible. We're going back. We're scorched earth here. No pun intended. We can right click on that, hit create branch here. Okay, so now we've created a new branch. We can make changes to that and everything. And then, if we go create a new text document, okay, let's just assume I broke everything. We needed to start all over. All of the changes, all of the features were terrible. Just commit that one change. But, beyond like going back and rolling back there, that's when things start going really wrong. And you might actually want to go back into command line and deal with cherry picking and things like that. There. So there'll be some more learning to do there. But as you can see, this video's already gotten pretty long, and all we've been dealing with is sort of the basics. Let's go ahead and delete that terrible branch of signs of me making mistakes. Git is extremely helpful. I like working with it. It's not perfect. Nothing is. But it's pretty darn close. But be careful when you're working with stuff. Don't just go around willy-nilly. If you're not sure how something works, if you're not sure what a particular feature of the system does, GitKraken offers tutorials on their system as well, so that you can get more familiar with a bunch of it. But this just kind of got you started. This will give you the basics for, at least even if it's just a single branch, just your master branch, and you're just making commits on your changes, that's still better than nothing. It's still far better than nothing. You can create branches, do crazy. You don't have to use the Git flow methodology. You can do it however you want. I do recommend at least a master and a develop branch, just so that you can be making changes separate from your master branch, which is going to be your live version, and test them before rolling them in. But, you can do it however you want. Okay? Come up with whatever system works best for you.
So now hopefully you should be able to manage your mods a whole lot easier, save a lot of space on disk, and be able to tell what commits you're working with. It might take a bit of practice, but this is something that I encourage everyone to pick up, whether it's Git or SVN or some other form of version control, because you never know what's going to happen. And the last thing anybody wants to do is have to rebuild their mod from scratch because they've lost the files, or because they missed a circular reference and they can't load up the dev kit with their mod anymore. It's not a fun experience. It is wholly discouraging of, going back in there and actually getting into it. But if you're using version control, all that happens is you just have to roll back a commit or two, or, however long since the change was made that actually caused that problem. Or if, something happens to your PC, you just download your repository from the remote and you're good. So until next time, happy modding.